Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Laurie Davis, host of the Today Show here at the Disability Channel. And yes, he's back. I know you saw him yesterday, but he's getting to be kind of a regular on the show, right? So, welcome to the show, Dr. Ramin Moderi.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be back. So I don't have to wait a week. Or,
There
well,
you
we had Fridays also we used to do, but yeah, it's glad to be back Wednesday.
Yeah. So on Wednesdays, we're revamping our shows, reconfiguring the lineup. And so on Wednesdays, we decided that this is where we would talk about VIP, very important people, which stands for Voices of and for Indigenous people, specialized communities, um, people that we want to feature on the show. So today we're going to start a three-part series. And today, Ramin and I are going to talk statistically and geographically about the presence of gangs in our lives, which does and has posed a big threat to our safety and everything else that's going on. Gangs exist from right where Ramin is in Southern California all the way to the north where I am and every community in between. And we just want to pre qualify. I've never been in a gang. I cannot speak with credibility about the lifestyle. I'm on the outside looking in. But we are going to have some guests in the next couple of weeks, our next two episodes, with individuals who've actually been in the gang life and got out and so on. So, have you ever been in a gang, Ramin?
No, I have not. And, I was surprised. I was talking to my daughter and she goes, Dad, I can tell you about them. I'm like shocked, my little angel. And it's like, oh, uh, she said, Dad, and I have friends who've been. I said, well, she went to really good high school, nice high school, so you don't know what's out there. And sometimes we close our eyes. And she said, "Oh yeah," and it's we are in Southern California, and it's here. And while we discuss things that we'll see, my God, it's a huge thing, and it doesn't matter which geographic, which part of the country or continent you're in. So no, personally, I have not. I have contact. I've been working with some, but I've never really been involved or been into except movies
Right.
and books.
Well, yeah. And I watched a movie last night. It was called Jury Duty.
Mm, yeah.
And it was the story of a young woman who was called into jury duty and then approached by the mobster who was on trial, his gang, to have him acquitted. And the way that she would be able to do that would be to hang the jury. And if she didn't do that, they were going to kill her little boy. So she didn't really have much of a choice. She was between a rock and a hard place. But there was, it's interesting that that's the movie that I watched last night, and it was all about gang activity all around. And of course, our good friend Jay Stoyan, there's another potential guest for us because Jay wrote a book about 20 years ago, The
That's
Life of
funny.
an Irish Street Gang. So, so we have connections. We have connections, and we'll make sure that these guys get on board with us talking about that. All right. So let's go over to you. Well, first of all, let's look at the why. Why would a kid, 12, 14, join a gang in the first place?
Right. Well, I think I will be very much interested in our guests because you precisely mentioned that's like a top time of their age that they are very vulnerable. It's funny, they have a lot of common traits, most of them in their background when they join. So I think it's not based on what I've seen. Um, I think that's not my expertise. I know some of them, what has happened, and it always goes back to the roots. And I think you're more a specialist than I am. And again, I would be really interested in our guests. I think what I'm probably can talk about mostly from the business side of things. I'm going to look at the structure, economy side of things, and business side. So, what can we learn from the structure of the gangs? I mean, when you go back to 1880s, 1870s, when we had the Irish, and they come here in New York and in Boston, and then think about mafia, Italian mafia. Think about Al Capone. If you ever watch Godfather, which is one of the greatest movies, there's a lot of lessons to be learned. So my life, I always try to learn from the things that it might appear very negative, but there's always a positive we can teach ourselves from those. So, um, but again, I have my own opinions why people join, but I will leave it up to you and our guest because I think you're more obviously um, expert on these things. But again, these are going to be my guess if I offered my choices. So I would
Right.
like to hear what you have to say as far as with all the
Mhm.
works that you've done with variety of. I
Mhm.
know you have worked with quite
Oh,
a few
yes.
gang
Yes.
members, so
Yes,
you
I
do
have.
have excellent. So I would like
Mhm.
to hear your,
Yeah.
your.
Well, the clients that I've had who've been in gangs and out, they live the gang life, but generally it starts with even something as simple as a bag of chips and a can of pop.
Mm,
And they can be lured that way with a bag of chips and a can of pop. Maybe they haven't seen a treat in years or ever. Usually they prey on children who are not solid or secure at home. So there's problems at home. They've either been thrown out of the house. They're vulnerable, really, really vulnerable. And my clients who've shared those raw beginnings with me, it was all about not being parented and not having good parents. And so abandoned by the family. In other words, maybe they've gotten into a little bit of trouble and the family has abandoned them. So they're looking for a family, a place where they
right.
feel that they belong and also can be of service because one of our main core belief value system, we all want to be of service and we all want to help. So if I can't help my family, or if I do help my family and it doesn't get acknowledged or recognized, well, maybe here's a place where I'll be validated. So it's often, I would say 90% of the time, I don't have that statistic, but those are how they get lured in. There's trouble in paradise, so to speak, and they're looking for a place to land. And so the gang structure, which you're going to talk about, is very savvy at finding and preying upon those kids. I mean, we're talking 12-year-olds. And then the training begins. And who's more impressionable than a child? Right? So now this becomes not only a lifestyle, it becomes their schooling, their friends, their camaraderie, the validation, the support, and we're in business. So it's very personal why kids join. And I know there's tons of other reasons, but those are the ones that I'm aware of based on the work that I've done with ex gang members and anybody that I've heard speak about being in a gang. Um, and the girls are talking here. Sylvia and Kathy are here. And Sylvia
Yeah.
says, gang life and the lost souls that seek friendship and love. And gangs know who is vulnerable. Yeah, they'd probably never pick you or I up, you know,
Mm.
just saying. No, but you see, there are probably times, though, in our childhood when we could have been picked up had we been more vulnerable. Mhm. So that's all I know. I don't know much more than that about the beginnings and the well, Kathy's mentioned money may be a factor. Well, when you're 12, it's not about the money, it's about the security. A place to stay, food on the table, basic needs are covered. So they take care of that. and they take very good care of their people. As a matter of fact, I can connect that to a personal story. I went through a very nasty court case back in the 90s. And after it was all said and done, I went to see um, a chiropractor slash massage therapist. I was all stressed out. My body was completely like a big ball of nerves. So he was recommended to me, and he had been a wrestler, a famous wrestler back in the
Mm.
day, and a member of the mafia in Montreal. I didn't know that when I went to him. He was recommended to me by a friend. He was really good at what he did. And he got that stress out of me and the pain and everything. And I was telling him my story, and I shared that my lawyer had sold me out, you know. And he said, well, he said, you'd have been safer and better off if you had been a member of the Montreal Mafia. Because, first of all, if you had been a member of the Mafia, that whole court case would never have happened. And if it did happen and it went down the way it did, your lawyer would be gone because we would have whacked him the next day for not taking care of you. So you see that protectionism, that safety. You know, some people say they say gang, and they get all these, like you said, these negative connotations attached to it. But they're organizations, and they're organized, which you're going to talk about. So yeah, I'm not saying I want to be in a gang, but I was told by a professional that I should have been because I would have been a lot safer. Imagine. Over to you.
No, I mean, but that's precisely that's what it is, and that's what I think it's interesting to study how the hierarchy works. I mean, we've seen, most of us, we've been in like network marketing. We talk about pyramids, how the whole thing works, and this is no different. And the only thing is like life and death in here. And one of the things you will notice, there are different categories of gangs. A lot of them, they were created in prisons, but there's a lot of them. When we think about gangs, we just think about drugs, and that's not so. There's like territorial. When you think about mafia, mafia never wanted to get involved with the drugs. It came later, and if they did, it was not hard drugs. It was the soft drugs. And again, our members can explain us what I guess when they come and join us. But the idea is, how did they manage? If you have territories, and basically, how do you, first of all, negotiate which territory? How that structure works as far as money. And Kathy correctly mentioned, when the first thing we think about is the lure of money. And as you said, initially when they get in, it's not. But later they think, well, the head, they have a board of directors, believe it or not. They have a central power. And again, I think uh, Godfather is such a great movie. And there's a lot of truth to that, how they operate. And they are very disciplined, if you've noticed. And, you know, um, uh, Breaking Bad, that's another one. That's about the drug dealers. But it shows you how the system works. And there is the code of honor in a way, which is a silent code of honor that they respect. And unfortunately, once you see, there's a lot of, when you think about big corporations, some of the big uh, corruptions, things have happened. You see, because there was no code of honor. And those are the things that's understood. So when I look at this, when you think about gangs, we just look at today's, but a lot of these gangs, besides the mafia and, we looked at that, they've been creating 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and they're still around. We think about, you know, we go back at the, like in California where I am, we have the Crips and Bloods. They started in LA. They're the rivalries, and for them was more of a territory. Then one of the largest ones are, the Aryan Brotherhood. They're like, Nazis there, but they were more of a prison gangs. It was all about their power struggle and protecting their own members. And they're very brutal. Like you said, there's no mercy. But not all of them are basically, they kill, or it's more about protecting their own members. And, that loyalty is important. Of course, again, our guests will talk about those that there's always a fear because they know too much about the hierarchy and the system. So, we see, at least in the United States, we talked about there are groups like neo-Nat, like Aryans, they're all white. Then we have quite a few African Americans groups, and then we have Latinos. They could be from Mexico, the Puerto Ricans. There are groups now, they're coming from Venezuela, El Salvador. I mean, Guatemala. I mean, they are have their own groups, and it's all about the identity in that situation. And as I mentioned, like in Chicago, we go back. There's Latin Kings, and then we have those are mostly Mexican, and they are some Puerto Rican. They started in 1960 in Chicago, and they're still going. They're still strong. How could that happen? We that they are known how the policing, and that's what again I'm interested in seeing how our guests, with everything known, how they glue this, how did they keep that structure together? All days, the police would know where they are, but they will move. They were very mobile. But after a while, I mean, they just get their territory. There's this loyalty from the neighborhood. When you think about Al Capone, he had over 10,000 people in his funeral. A big,
What?
yeah, he had one of the highest funerals in Chicago because of he knew the system. He helped the community. Remember, we are going to Great Depression with all the wrong things he did. Again, he's coming back from a Catholic background. He helped the churches. He helped the poor. So they knew the system, and it was almost like more of a socialism in a way. They were helping to make sure they are fed. So there was this big, there was this loyalty. They would not snitch, and the snitching, as you know, is like a definite no-no, and especially in the prison system. So on the other hand, we have the MS-13 that started in 1980s, and then one of the oldest ones, believe it or not, we have the Jewish Defense League. They were more the political side. Get rid of, they were in United States and Israel. Get rid of people that was for against Semitism. So that was the way. But they were gangs. So it doesn't have to be all about drugs, and it doesn't have to be all about money. Um, so one of the interesting things that there was a graduating student in 2000 in Colombia. He started studying the gangs, and he actually now he's a professor in sociology in Colombia, and he was looking at from the economic side of things, and that's what I can talk about. Again, the life I cannot, but from the economic side of things, it's really fascinating about their recruitments. And like you mentioned, they know where to go. And you said like a bag of chips. They're very good at that. And they know the vulnerability. And you've said, we talked about yesterday, but you also, when you look at the victims of the robbery, or even when we talk about rape, the predator generally knows the feeling of their victim. They know how they react. If they're nervous, if they are not confident, and they that's their prey. So at the same thing in the gang recruitment, they know who's vulnerable and who needs, like you mentioned, the sense of value and belonging. Like you mentioned, a lot of them come from broke, not all of them, because there's some actually rich white dudes are coming from really high. That's for the sense of, again, significance sometimes. And we hear about the rap singers that they claim, some of them they just for glory. And I don't want to use names, some really big names. They never been part of gang, but they want to, attract for their music or publicity. Say, oh yeah, I was part of this gang. Well, sometimes they do not survive if they were part of that gang.
Mhm.
So basically, a lot of times is that vulnerability, broken homes, like you mentioned, or the abusive parenting. And so it's always about out. So
Um,
go ahead.
yeah, if you don't mind, just I think this is the time to mention this. Um, what I'd like us to be also communicating today is the size of the community. So, for example, I lived in a community of 250 people in the winter on the lake, which grew to 3,000 in the summer. But we were victims of a gang that existed in my community of 250 people. And everybody knew who they were,
Yes.
everybody knew who they robbed, and they actually are, we were almost burned down, because two gang members in a stolen truck tried to rob the liquor store. The owner of the liquor store chased them into our yard. They parked this truck, this was in 2018, parked this truck 3 feet away from our double detached garage, and then torched the thing. And if it had not been for Pride, our dog, which is why he is so spoiled, he smelled the smoke and woke us up at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I looked out our front window and I thought our garage was on fire because I couldn't even see the truck. And those two guys escaped on foot. We knew exactly where they'd gone because there was a gang meth house across the road from us. And the police came an hour later and said they had apprehended them but had to let them go because they couldn't link them to the crime physically. So it doesn't matter the size of your community. You don't have to be in Los Angeles.
Right.
And the smaller the community, and I'm thinking about some of our northern communities that are right now plagued with gangs. The communities are very tight knit and small, so everybody knows everybody, right? It's not like Los Angeles where you're victimized by a gang and nobody knows who they are or who you are. Or I just wanted to bring that up because uh, right now, I know in one of our northern communities right now, they're hearing gunshots every single day. Every single day. They're almost desensitized right now. They hear the gunshot and they go, "Oh well," but that's gang activity. So I just needed to bring that up because you're going to reach back around and talk about the economics and and the police are like, I don't know if their hands are tied, or they'll threaten them to burn their house down or kill their wife or take their kids, or I don't know that. Our guests will be able to inform us of that.
No,
So
that's
yeah, so as a senior, we've got a lot of people being victimized right now by gangs, and it's organized.
that's exactly exactly. It is
So I'll get
organized.
back to you on the organization of it
Right.
all.
And as I mentioned, it's not just about drugs. It's about
No.
control, power, extortion, and that's how it started. The territories and how the business owners, in order to be protected, because that's the power of
Yes.
organization. Oh, you got to pay 20% of or 10%, whatever you earn every week, right on time. And again, I don't want to, those are the bad things, but learning from that, the discipline that they have, what they do, they're right on time. The books are perfect. They collect every penny is accounted for. If you have a penny here or there, they get punished because everybody's accountable in that organization. Again, we look at the glory of, oh, the drug dealers are making so much money. Well, one of the things, if you notice, if you watch a lot of these movies, these drug dealers live with their mom and dad or, parents' house. If they were making so much money, they wouldn't be. So we have to differentiate who's making that money. So generally, the organization starts, they have the main boss, and then they have a central, the board of directors. The rest, majority of them are the foot soldiers. These foot soldiers are the one who, if it's the drugs, they deal. If there is, they have to teach a business a lesson. They're the ones who go there. And then you have it below the foot soldiers, the ones that they want to be foot soldiers. The question is, these foot soldiers, believe it or not, they make so little money. They do, because majority of everything goes to the head of the group, the board of directors. I give you one example, economic example. If first of all, the second person in power, they always send out 20% of their revenues immediately goes to the boss. But what happens is, we're talking about, let's say, the drugs or extortions. If the boss is making $500,000, and that's what it is, just as an example, the foot soldiers make $500. I mean, there's a big discrepancy. And why is that? And again, they are accounted, their different levels. So they have the board of directors, and why people would do that? They can go work a minimum wage and make, money in McDonald's. They will make more money. The idea is they think they would get to the next level. That's where because sometimes some of them make $20,000 or $30,000 a month, and it could be lucrative. There's some of these gangs. I mean, their members have, but majority of those are there. Again, initially was because of source of belonging and being a member of a community for them. But the second was, oh, so and so is making that money. The interesting thing is the boss knows that, and on purpose makes sure the foot soldiers don't make any money. And the reason for that is so for them to know who's the boss. This is the boss with all the power, this luxurious environment, whatever, and they have to listen to him. So there's a power in here that unless they're really dedicated, they're not going to move on. But there's this, again, the perception of letting them know, hey, listen, I got all the power. And that's what how they're organized. And again, watching the movies, it gives us a good, movies are fiction, but they come from reality of life. Even when we exaggerate things, I think a lot of good movies, and we've talked about, some of the movies about investing, and we've talked about trading, but there's a lot of truth to that because I've lived through that. I've seen the people that they project on the movie set. I've seen them. I've seen what happens on Wall Street, what happens in the parties, and there's a truth. So it's not just fiction. Even if it's like exaggerated, it's still there. And that's what I go back. There's some great movies. Even a movie like Casino, we learn so much about the interrelations. And you can see that you mentioned about safety. A lot of these, not all of them are out there to kill people. They have their discipline. There is a reason sometimes, they're not gun swinging. They do have the discipline. They get punished if they didn't do it for the right reason. The rivalries are the one most of the time. It's about competition. So they don't try to just do, but they do. And a lot of innocent people right in the middle. But sometimes they do have their purpose. Even if they do robberies, they do have, again, there was a reason for that a lot of times. So it's not just, being anarchists in a way. So they are very structured in that. And that's what fascinated me, that how, again, the management works precisely. There is a management, there's accountability from the accounting side, how everything is accounted for. They have their own accountant, which is for life. They would not see the time of the day. And, it was like with Al Capone, it was a little thing about tax evasion. They couldn't get him. And it goes back to your question. The police knows where they are. it's amazing how they don't even want to go to that territory. A lot of, I know we have like Compton in Southern California. A lot of them, they don't even, they're afraid to go there. There's a fear of life because the community is tight knit too. So, like you have said it before, somebody's cousin is a member, somebody's brother is part of that. As much as they hate to do it, they cannot because they have to protect their own family. So,
Hmm.
fortunately, we don't look at from outside as an outsider. I say, "Oh my God, police! Just go! People are life is in danger." Well, there is that relationship problems or issues that they have to protect. You have also, you've said it many times when it comes to question of abuse in families and other things, the drugs, and as someone from again outside, I have to say this elite intellectuals who write the books and they live in theories and they tell the society what to do. Yeah, it's easy when you have this utopia mentality how the world should be. Well, the reality is different. Is that when we study the people's relationship, that's why again from economic point of view, I've said it many times, I repeat myself, the heads of the central banks, the members of the one who talk about inflation and interest rates, most of them they never worked in their lives. They've had a paycheck coming from the government to them. So how would they understand that small business suffering when they have to pay their employees, they have to pay their taxes, they have to pay the suppliers, how they live day to day. They're not sure their business will. They don't understand it. They live under as from the book point of view. Yes, things work. The same thing happens when we look at why the police is not doing this. Why not? The families are in danger. Why they're not snitching out? They protect. But I also heard sometimes when the young, um, if it's like the beginning, the police comes and threatens them, the youngsters, they come to the door, they say, listen, once you're in the prison, life is not pretty. Because again, they have separate gangs and they will take care of you. And sometimes the parents I've heard, at least in California, people that have known and they 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 don't say who did it, but the police shows up at the door, the 13-year-old who's been part of this, they give them a lesson. They say, well, listen, this is what's going to happen to you. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But there's a one way in the beginning for them to maybe get out of it before they're too deep in this problem. I mean, that's my understanding that has happened. I've seen some parents have done that. But generally, the communities are very close knit and they don't snitch out. And that's the problem that the police has, that they need witnesses, but also I need to say the system a lot of times is corrupt as well. I mean, as I said, we watched the mafia is like the same thing with all these gangs. They know who the connections are and how to, it's all about economics, right? How the finances work. And it's not just in the United States or Mexico or Canada, it's all over the world. Every
Hmm.
place,
Hmm.
they just call it a different name. And
Yes.
then, in, you know, in, in many emerging countries, bribery is part of life. They
Hmm.
just know it is a business. So
Right.
you pay the head of the organization. Well, there's this government organization. You need a permit. Oh, it's going to take 6 months. 10 minutes later, it's done. Ah,
Right.
the envelope, a gift basket of gift. Oh, it was just a gift. Please accept this, and then boom, the things are done. So
Hmm.
it goes around the world. We don't call it gangs, but basically it's the same mentality in a way. It's extortion in a way because the people in power they know where to go, and uh, it happens in United States. It's very obvious when you think about of all the states. The most corrupt states are New Jersey, they are in New Orleans or in Louisiana and Chicago. This is a well known. But the thing is, a gang member, robs something or does for $10. These people do it for millions of dollars. The
Mhm.
politicians, the judges. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that. And you can see all of a sudden a senator goes to jail or gets caught. But you know how many others haven't been caught? Some of the other
Mhm.
politicians, how
Mhm.
many judges, policemen. So there is, the system is not, again, is clean cut. So the system in the gangs and mafia is very clear. They know exactly where you stand, who's in power, it can deviate. Unfortunately, the system outside with the police or judges, it's not clear.
It's not clear.
It's not. So that's why they, there's this, again, unfortunately, and I use the Breaking Bad. It's just one of them, more recent, or Wire. The Wire was about life of the gangs, and there's a lot of interesting movies. And I know Jay has, he's written the book and he's making a movie. That will be an interesting topic. There's, of course, you have Hell's Angels or the on the bike. The mentalities are the same, but the bottom line is you see how they actually have a hierarchy with a disciplined organization structure. Yet you go to some of the businesses, they have no structure. They're from one way, and they wonder why they don't succeed, and why some of these gangs are around for 50 years, 100 years. Well, something is working, and I hate this. So I'm looking at the positive side, but of course, we rather not to have gangs in our communities because of our safety, but also
Right.
because of our children,
Mhm.
because now there's that lure, right? So
Mhm.
their future. And that's what, again, it would be really fascinating to talk to some of the
Mhm.
members,
Yeah.
why it happened. And I will be,
Well, we know who they are, and they're open to speak about it too,
yes.
because they can shed light on the other side. You and I are sitting on one side of the desk; they're going to be sitting on the other side, and we always are very big on credibility. So we're not here to talk about something we don't know. We're telling you we don't know, and we know. Someone said to me one time, people might know about you.
Yeah,
So that's something that we've read about or we've experienced. So we know about the gang life, but we don't know the gang life,
exactly.
right? We know about it. So there's a big gap there, a big difference, and it's something that we wanted to talk about because right now it's prevalent um, in many, many, many communities. There's no boundaries such as race, color, creed, religion.
Yeah,
It's like suicide and abuse. They know no boundaries.
absolutely.
And so when I'm watching the news, the Los Angeles news, and we see 15 people go into a store in the night and take everything out of that store, that's gang. One time it was a singular or maybe two robbers would go into a bank with a gun and rob a bank. No, not now. It's en masse, which makes it even more dangerous or leaves us feeling not very safe. And how many stories have we heard about them breaking into homes of seniors, uh, killing people's dogs? I mean, you name it, they do it, right?
No.
Yeah.
Having said that, I'm going to follow up, Dr. Laurie. You just mentioned about experts or being knowing. I was I was watching, I don't know, it was on BBC or it was on NPR or something, that somebody was came. He was an expert, and it was about my country. He was a professor, and he was telling, I mean, very adamant because he was an expert, telling about the culture, what's going to happen in my country. And I'm sitting there. I lived through that. I was part of that. And he was so confident, and he was completely out in the left field. He had no clue what he's talking about. He had never lived through it. And yet he was that expert about the what we go through. And I was born there and I grew up in that culture and I know what happened. So sometimes you have these experts, and again, we have tons of degrees and they are talk about culture. Well, culture is called, you got to live through it to become an expert. You cannot just read books and think about this. Yes, you can say that I interpret this from this writing, but he was just giving such a wrong information. And it's the same thing, I mentioned last week about these pollsters. They become such an expert. They're making, well, real life is different. Yeah, we can analyze data, and I do that. I do analyze data. But human psychology, human relationships is so different. You cannot analyze that. You can live through that with experience and being involved with that. So that's why I just wanted to interject that expertise. A lot of people,
Mhm.
they think they are expert. Um, a lot of men, like on, you know, issues but they also doesn't mean that they don't know some of the greatest coaches of, let's say, in my profession, soccer. They were great coaches, but they weren't a great soccer player. So that doesn't disqualify, but they played soccer, but they are great teachers. They're great mentors. They have a great communication. On the other hand, you will have a great soccer player, not a very good coach, because it's not just about playing it, but also communicating it. So you have to have both. You have to experience it. So then somebody just reads a book and comes and gives it to you. And here I am. I'm just saying, based on
Mhm.
experience, what I've seen, these are my interpretation of some of the people who actually interviewed a lot of the heads of the gangs and what that was understand. But I've never lived through that. And I
No.
cannot really judge that. I can just give an input. But unfortunately, you do have a lot of experts that they can write papers and get their PhDs on it, but never lived through it. So that's just an observation.
Yeah, and I think that's why we wanted to pre-qualify and be credible and let you know that you know we didn't live the gang life, but we don't know it, but we know about it. And that's why we're going to bring on our guests, because they know. They know how they were lured. They know what they were asked to do. And they're willing to talk about it because now they're out of the gangs living lovely lives. And that's another aspect, when you get involved in a gang, um, getting off the street or getting out of out of it is very, very difficult from what I understand.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
Yeah,
you,
no,
but
go ahead.
it is a huge key that a lot of gang members stay because they don't know what life is outside that. They don't want to take that chance. This reminds me, one of the greatest movies, if nobody's watched, it's a Shawshank Man.
Yes.
It's one of the most wonderful movies in a way of understanding the life. And I can't remember this elderly gentleman. He was released.
Morgan Freeman.
Oh no, it was that
Oh,
he was not Morgan Freeman, but that he was white and he was
oh yes. Oh yes, I do remember Shawshank
so,
Redemption. Yes.
right. So after many years, most of his life in prison, he lives the prison and he hung himself. He wrote a
Yeah.
nice letter because he didn't know anything outside that life. He had a value in the sense he had a there was a responsibility for him. There was a respect for him. He was valuable there. He had a structure there. He knew what was his. He comes out, and you would think, I never forget. He had his suit on with his briefcase, like a little.
Yes.
But he he comes out, and next thing you know, he hung himself in the hotel room, and that is the problem with a lot of times when we get involved, we don't know, and that's why the work like you do, that's what it's important to do, that soul searching and offering uh, that there is alternatives. And that's what the problem is with our society sometimes, the policing and other things, that alternative is not shown or is not available, telling especially the younger they are, the teenagers, because that
Hmm.
sense of helplessness, at least
Hmm.
they get some value. So yeah, that just reminded me of that movie, that they don't know once they get out, what do they do? That's all they've known most of their
That's
life.
right.
So that would
That's
be
right.
interesting to hear. I mean, these are special people who have left
Oh,
And
yes.
I know they have taken your workshops and other things. Some,
Very strong people. Yes.
yeah, it takes that strength to say no and get out.
So here's a thought, a question that just came up for me. What would be the difference between a gang and a cult? Is a cult another form of a gang? Because I think gangs come in many packages.
Yeah.
As you described at the beginning of the show, there was this Jewish group, there was this Black group, Latino group. What about cults? Because they're usually based on some form of religion or, you know, but they're still hard to get out of there. And I also know that if you want to rescue a prostitute from the streets, let's say a young girl hits the streets to prostitute herself to pay for her habit, she's usually managed by gang members called pimps.
Mhm.
Once you start that process, it takes 5 years to get a girl off the street. Yes. So somehow there's a connection there, I think, with the cult, gangs, the whole prostitution ring, the sex trafficking, which is now the largest crime on the planet. There are more people being smuggled than guns and drugs now. So that's how this whole gang mentality has escalated. And since COVID, even, they're being exposed even more. So, any comments on that?
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. And I think when it comes to sex trafficking, again, I know it's huge, like in the Middle East, because it's more of a white crime. It's more of a wealthy crime. We see it starts like with the gangs. We think of a working class, people in the poverty. I think, unfortunately, the sex crimes are, or the trafficking is more of a wealth in a sense. The end results becomes that. So I see there's that differentiation, which is even worse, because when you have the money, starting with the money here, the drugs didn't start with the money. The money became a production or the end results of that. The other one is already money is there, and they're
Right.
the one who are encouraging that. So, and so much easier to you know, buy favoritism, and you have the money. You can do
Yes.
that. So if you notice, again, there's a lot of, I mentioned Middle East. I don't want to pinpoint, but I've seen quite a bit happening there, and there's a lot of wealth there who's doing that. But it's
Hmm.
all over the world. So,
Hmm.
and the cult, I think that's a very valid point. It's more of, again, both are about control. For the gangs, again, it's more of, there's some economic side. There's more layers. With the cult, there's always one. It's this is
Yes.
it. There's a one single. It's a mental game. Is that shame and guilt, and that's again very similar to getting out. But actually, sometimes the cults are worse than gangs because they
Yes.
totally control you, and that's uh, there's no economic value. Although they collect so much money, but there's always one person, so there's no layers of. It's always the
Okay.
members are the one who the burden of a lot of them have to pay money to get in. I think in the gangs, the foot soldiers, they do not. They do all the work and they pay the money back, but they get paid a little bit. In cult, it's you have to give your shirt and your. I mean, you
Yeah.
have everything. You're pretty naked. That's what you become so dependent, and you cannot leave.
Right.
And
Right.
but also
So,
they have total control of you. Total control of your mind and body, and in the name of whatever they
hmm,
decided. So sometimes, it reminds me of that Jamestown in
yes.
1979 and 1980, and how it gave them to talk about Kool-Aid. That's where it's come from. They drank the Kool-Aid. I mean, how cruel could that be? That you kill your whole community in the promise of whatever the
Yeah.
next myth is. So.
So, what I'm hearing you say is it's the structure that's different.
I
Hmm.
believe so, and the purpose, obviously. But at the end of the day, it's about control. But
Hmm.
the gangs have that structure of, um, and they know what they're doing. with called, sometimes they know, but there's a lot of mental problems too. I mean, they
Yeah.
feel they're God, you know.
Yeah.
In gangs, you don't see
No.
that. And sometimes the gangs, and if you notice, again, I go back to mafia, there is that religious element of the
Oh,
police.
yeah.
They want to give, they do have some community responsibilities. They feel that they have to share, you know. It's
Hmm.
not just about bribing and other things. And
Hmm.
there's a strong relationship a lot of times with the family, in that, like the mother figure or something like that.
Hmm.
It the gangs themselves, the foot soldiers, unfortunately, they have that vulnerability. So again, these are just observations. I've not
Yeah.
lived through it, so
No,
just,
that's okay.
I'm not expert on it. I just, as
We
a,
just know about it, and we know it's out there, and we know it exists, and we have been victims of it as well.
yeah.
And even if you've never been physically victimized, we are all victims now, because I don't go to the banking machine after dark,
Hmm.
right? I'm at the grocery store and my car's unlocked while I put the grocery cart back in the rack. I don't always think to lock my car when I do that. And I was actually in the parking lot right here in my own town at the grocery store. It was in the summer because the weather was nice. And there was this guy hanging around the parking lot looking at the cars. And when I came out, this younger man got out of his truck and he said, "I'm going to walk you to your car." I didn't know who he was, but he was aware that there was a little group hanging out at the, and he said, "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to walk you to the car because there's some seedy characters hanging out in the parking lot."
Mm,
So you see, even though we might not have been directly hit, it's there. And I think it's important for
right,
us to be aware that it's there. And you could be a victim at any time.
right.
Yeah. So the solution will come when we bring our guests on, because I'd like to talk to some people also about what are they doing about the gang problem in their community.
Correct.
You know,
Absolutely.
it's there. It's happening every day. What's happening? What are you doing about it? So I'd like to pull in some people from some of our communities that are experiencing that direct hit with gang members to find out. So I think our next show next week, we'll have some ex-gang members on as guests. And then the following week, we might have them back because maybe they have the solutions too. So
Yeah.
anyway, so my feelers are out there. And if you have any connections where you are the expert because you've actually lived the life, then we need to talk to you and have you on the show. Anything else you need to say? I hope everybody enjoyed our VIP show today. Very important people. We talked about some very important people today. Over to you.
No, I'm glad you mentioned this is not exclusive to one community, one generation.
Mm-mm.
I mentioned this has been going on for hundreds of years. I mean, we're going back to 1880s, and but it is, the major ones are still from 1960s, 1970s. So it's an ongoing thing. And obviously, nobody has come up with the complete solution. But we start with one community at a time, and if we can do that, that safety, that would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But we're just opening the this box that hopefully we can at least make our audience be aware that, first of all, they're not the only victims. It happens all over, but also some of our communities, they have no clue that something like this is happening out there because they've never been to. And
Yeah.
I used to work in New York, and I used to joke around. If you haven't been robbed 2 or 3 times, you're not a New Yorker. So it was facts of life, and I was there, in early 1980s, and I remember that. So, uh, but most people here, you go to Beverly Hills, or they have no clue. But then they go to some places, it happens. So it's the
Mm-hmm.
reality of life. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that at least we give some awareness for.
That's right. That's right. And that's all our job is anyway.
Right,
Did you know that? We're just awareness experts.
right.
We may not be gang experts, ladies and gentlemen, but we are good at making people aware. All right. Well, goodbye for today.
Thank you.
Dr. Laurie Davis and Dr. Ramin Modiri here hosting the Today Show as we present some information around our very important communities, very important people, and educating.
Yeah, yes.
Tomorrow, we will be featuring at 9 a.m. Former NHLer Doug Smith, along with special guest. We call him Dr. Vic. And they have a beautiful, super big project happening right now, which they'll share with us tomorrow, a very leading edge center for healing. So can't wait to hear that interview. All right. So bye for now and
Yeah,
have a great rest of the day, everybody.
thank you. Bye bye.